In the quiet of Mafeking, decisions were quietly shaping a test of endurance that would outlast ordinary measures of time and strength. Mafeking, located on the edge of the British Empire in southern Africa at the close of the 19th century, held strategic significance that belied its modest size. The town's position made it a focal point between British forces and the Boer republics, and its control carried implications for broader military campaigns across the region. Soldiers and civilians alike moved through daily routines that appeared calm but were underscored by subtle tensions. Major Robert Baden-Powell, commanding the garrison, approached his post with careful attention, recognizing that the choices he made would affect not only immediate operations, but the town's ability to endure an extended period of uncertainty. The fortifications were serviceable yet limited, offering protection without guaranteeing safety, and the soldiers, while trained and disciplined, had not faced the prolonged pressures that would define the coming months. Early preparations involved organizing troops, establishing routines, and considering supply lines, all undertaken with an awareness that small decisions could carry long-term consequences. Civilians contributed quietly to the town's resilience, assisting in logistical tasks and sharing local knowledge that would prove vital. Daily patrols, the distribution of resources, and the management of defensive positions required careful judgment and coordination, establishing a rhythm of discipline and foresight. Minor indicators, a shift in enemy activity, a sudden shortage of provisions, or changes in local conditions, hinted at pressures that would escalate over time. The interplay between strategy, environment, and human behavior became evident, showing that the siege's outcomes would depend as much on thoughtful planning as on valor. By examining Baden-Powell's leadership style, listeners gain insight into the balance of authority, delegation, and initiative required to maintain both order and adaptability among the troops. Each routine task, from the rotation of sentries to the rationing of supplies, carried a weight that influenced morale and preparedness. Civilians' involvement reinforced the town's social cohesion and operational readiness, providing a network of support that underpinned military decisions. The audience, accustomed to reflective and strategic narratives, is invited to consider the quiet, deliberate nature of preparation, seeing how foresight and patience were critical even before direct confrontation. Small incidents, scouting reports, local disputes, or minor logistical challenges serve to illustrate the importance of attentive observation and careful response without revealing the full scale of the trials ahead. Gradually, the cumulative effect of these choices established the foundation for resilience, revealing that leadership, judgment, and human effort were the true fortifications of Mafeking. The audience should feel a sense of calm anticipation, understanding that the siege was shaped not by sudden drama, but by the continuous, deliberate actions of those within the town. Even in these early days, the steady, calculated decisions being made quietly behind the walls were sowing the seeds of endurance that would define Mafeking's extraordinary test and the legacy it would leave behind. The first signs of confrontation often arrive subtly, yet they carry consequences that shape the course of every decision thereafter. As tensions began to mount, the garrison at Mafeking faced the delicate challenge of responding to the initial movements of the Boer forces. Scouts returned with reports of enemy positions and patrols, revealing that the opposition was both attentive and strategic. Major Baden-Powell confronted immediate choices: how to deploy his limited men effectively, which areas required reinforcement, and how to maintain confidence and order among troops adjusting to the uncertainty of an impending siege. Each decision held consequences not only for the immediate defense of the town, but for the long-term endurance of the garrison, which would soon be tested over months of sustained pressure. Early skirmishes, though limited in scale, provided crucial intelligence about enemy tactics, highlighting the need for observation, patience, and adaptive thinking, rather than purely reactive measures. Soldiers accustomed to conventional methods were required to interpret new patterns, anticipate movements, and adjust defensive strategies accordingly, balancing caution with initiative. Supply management became an urgent concern, as initial assessments indicated the potential for shortages in ammunition and provisions. Civilians played a complementary role, offering local knowledge, assisting with communication, and contributing to logistical planning, enhancing the garrison's ability to respond efficiently to emerging challenges. The narrative unfolds deliberately, focusing on the reasoning behind decisions rather than the dramatization of conflict, allowing listeners to appreciate the intellectual and strategic demands of early siege life. Minor incidents: a miscommunication during a patrol, the discovery of a vulnerable sector, or a sudden adjustment in rationing, illustrated how small choices could influence both morale and operational readiness. Psychological factors were equally significant, as maintaining confidence under uncertainty required consistent leadership, reassurance, and careful management of expectations among both soldiers and civilians. The audience is encouraged to consider the subtle pressures that define early engagements, recognizing that sustained attention, measured judgment, and foresight were as critical as physical preparedness. By highlighting the interplay between observation, decision, and consequence, the story emphasizes that the garrison's capacity to adapt was being formed in these initial encounters, even as the full scale of the siege remained deliberately undisclosed. The cumulative effect was the development of a disciplined, responsive force capable of navigating the emerging challenges while preserving cohesion and morale. Listeners gain a sense of the deliberate, thoughtful approach required to anticipate problems, allocate limited resources, and respond to evolving threats with precision. Retention is maintained by presenting outcomes incrementally, ensuring the audience remains curious about the evolving situation without feeling rushed or overwhelmed. Every cautious assessment and deliberate adjustment in these early encounters quietly intensified the stakes, preparing Mafeking's defenders for the prolonged and intricate challenges that lay ahead. Endurance is often measured in quiet increments, where the passing days test resolve more than the fiercest battles ever could. As the Siege of Mafeking progressed, the relentless passage of time became the defining challenge for both soldiers and civilians. Daily routines, once predictable, now required continuous adaptation to the constraints of limited resources and the ever-present threat beyond the town's perimeter. Men rotated through sentry duties, drills, and maintenance of defensive positions, each task weighted with significance as fatigue slowly accumulated. Minor victories, such as successful reconnaissance or the preservation of critical supplies, were tempered by setbacks, including equipment shortages, minor illnesses, and the psychological strain of confinement. Leadership was exercised not solely through commands, but through the cultivation of resilience, morale, and initiative among troops. Major Baden-Powell's oversight provided stability, yet the contributions of officers and enlisted men who made tactical adjustments and addressed day-to-day challenges became essential to maintaining the town's cohesion. Civilians played a similarly critical role, supporting logistical needs, sustaining communication networks, and offering knowledge of the local environment that enhanced strategic decision-making. The interplay between human endurance and operational necessity became increasingly apparent. Survival depended as much on patience, adaptability, and foresight as on conventional defensive measures. Decisions regarding rationing, rotation of duties, and fortification maintenance were revisited regularly, reflecting the understanding that prolonged pressure demanded continuous recalibration. Small disruptions, a sudden shortage of supplies, minor structural damage, or a lapse in coordination, served as reminders that endurance was fragile and required constant attention. The narrative emphasizes the subtle tension of a long siege, presenting the audience with the layered consequences of each choice without dramatization. Psychological resilience was cultivated alongside practical measures, as soldiers learned to manage anxiety through routine, maintain focus despite monotony, and derive satisfaction from incremental accomplishments. Listeners are invited to reflect on the cumulative effect of patience, structure, and deliberate action, appreciating how the human capacity for adaptation is tested over extended periods. The pacing mirrors the rhythm of siege life itself, alternating between calm routines and moments of heightened attention, creating an immersive, audio-first experience that encourages sustained listening. Through this lens, the siege becomes a study in endurance, where each decision, adjustment, and minor success contributes to a larger framework of resilience. The audience gains insight into the disciplined interplay of leadership, initiative, and human perseverance, understanding that the siege's outcome depended on these qualities as much as any external factor. With each passing day, the quiet demands of survival sharpened the skills, judgment, and cohesion of Mafeking's defenders, reinforcing that endurance was both a test and a strategy in its own right. In the midst of sustained pressure, the ability to adapt and innovate became the quiet force that would define Mafeking's defense. As the siege continued, the garrison increasingly relied on ingenuity to meet the challenges imposed by limited manpower, scarce resources, and the constant observation of the Boer forces. Major Baden-Powell's leadership emphasized strategic flexibility, encouraging officers and enlisted men to anticipate problems and implement practical solutions within the framework of overall command. Defensive works were strengthened using available materials, and routine tasks were reassessed to maximize efficiency while minimizing risk. Creative measures were introduced to mislead the enemy and optimize the use of scarce supplies, from small-scale diversions to the careful management of rations. Each choice reflected a careful calculation, deploying troops to cover vulnerabilities, adjusting patrols to gather critical intelligence, and ensuring that morale remained steady despite uncertainty. Civilians contributed essential support, offering local knowledge, assisting with communication, and helping maintain order and continuity within the town. The narrative emphasizes that these adaptations were not spontaneous but thoughtful, reflecting a deliberate interplay of foresight, experience, and observation. Minor setbacks, unexpected environmental challenges, equipment limitations, or lapses in coordination highlighted the need for constant vigilance and adjustment, keeping listeners engaged through the subtle tension of uncertainty. By exploring the rationale behind each decision, the story illustrates how adaptive thinking became as vital as formal training, transforming constraints into opportunities for measured success. Psychological resilience and tactical ingenuity were closely linked. The capacity to maintain composure under pressure allowed soldiers to apply strategies effectively, while successful adaptations reinforced confidence and cohesion. Audience insight is achieved through the calm exposition of problem-solving processes, encouraging reflection on the complex relationship between leadership, initiative, and operational outcomes. The cumulative effect demonstrates that the outcome of Mafeking's defense depended not solely on strength or numbers, but on the disciplined application of creativity and judgment in the face of persistent limitations. Listeners are invited to appreciate the nuanced, incremental progress achieved through thoughtful adaptation, understanding that each minor adjustment contributed to the larger framework of resilience. The pacing maintains a steady forward pull, providing continuous engagement without sensationalism, while illustrating the depth of planning and responsiveness required to sustain an effective defense. As inventive strategies and careful planning shaped the town's response, every decision reinforced the quiet, enduring strength that allowed Mafeking to navigate months of sustained pressure and uncertainty. Amid the prolonged strain of siege life, the personal and collective cost became increasingly apparent, revealing the human dimension of endurance. The cumulative pressures of months under threat began to weigh heavily on both soldiers and civilians. Fatigue, illness, and the mental strain of constant vigilance challenged the garrison, while residents faced the uncertainties of limited supplies, confinement, and the ever-present awareness of danger. Leadership extended beyond tactical decisions, encompassing the careful management of morale, the organization of daily routines, and the fostering of cooperation between soldiers and civilians. Every small act, distributing provisions, maintaining shelter, or offering reassurance, contributed to the resilience that sustained the town. Reports of illness and minor injuries underscored the vulnerability of the population, emphasizing that survival depended as much on attention to human needs as on strategic foresight. Decisions regarding ration allocation, task rotation, and the maintenance of defensive readiness were revisited continuously, reflecting an acute awareness that the psychological and social dimensions of the siege were integral to overall success. Civilians' contributions were essential. Their familiarity with local terrain, efforts to maintain communication, and support for logistical tasks enabled soldiers to focus on critical operational responsibilities. The narrative unfolds with deliberate pacing, illustrating how endurance is tested not through sudden events, but through prolonged, incremental challenges that require adaptability, patience, and foresight. Minor disruptions, unexpected shortages, illness among key personnel, or lapses in coordination serve to highlight the fragility of cohesion and the ongoing need for thoughtful management. Psychological resilience was cultivated alongside practical measures. Soldiers learned to manage anxiety, maintain focus, and derive satisfaction from incremental achievements. The audience, composed of thoughtful, strategic listeners, is encouraged to reflect on the subtle interplay between human behavior, decision-making, and operational effectiveness, gaining insight into how endurance and adaptability combine to sustain a community under pressure. The cumulative effect demonstrates that Mafeking's survival was a product of deliberate choices, sustained effort, and the quiet courage of its people. By emphasizing the human experience alongside strategic decisions, listeners develop a nuanced understanding of how personal sacrifice and collective discipline shaped the town's ability to withstand prolonged adversity. Each act, whether small or seemingly routine, contributed to a larger network of resilience that allowed the garrison to navigate ongoing challenges. Every measured effort, every act of quiet courage, wove together the strength that sustained Mafeking, showing that true endurance arises from the cumulative effect of countless thoughtful decisions and persistent human resolve. The true measure of Mafeking's siege lies not in the walls or weapons, but in the enduring lessons it imparted on strategy, leadership, and human resilience. In the aftermath of 217 days under pressure, the implications of Mafeking extended far beyond the immediate survival of the town. The careful decisions, adaptive strategies, and sustained discipline of soldiers and civilians alike became enduring examples for military practice and leadership development. Officers reflected on the balance between initiative and command cohesion, understanding that empowering subordinates while maintaining structure was essential in prolonged operations. The garrison's success, measured through the preservation of lives and the continuity of defensive capability rather than dramatic victories, underscored the importance of preparation, foresight, and careful management of resources. Mafeking's experience informed doctrine, training, and organizational culture within the British Army, emphasizing endurance, adaptability, and the integration of human factors into strategic planning. Civilians' resilience and quiet heroism illustrated that effective defense extended beyond formal military action, highlighting the interdependence of community and command in sustaining operations under strain. The siege also resonated culturally, reinforcing ideals of duty, ingenuity, and perseverance, shaping public perception of both the conflict and those who endured it. Lessons drawn from Mafeking influenced logistical planning, communication systems, and psychological preparation for future engagements, demonstrating that long-term outcomes depend as much on foresight and adaptability as on immediate tactical success. Minor decisions, efficient allocation of supplies, rotation of personnel, and maintenance of morale illustrate the cumulative impact of sustained attention to both practical and human dimensions. The narrative encourages reflection on how structured, deliberate choices, rather than dramatic action alone, shape outcomes over extended periods. Listeners gain a comprehensive view of how leadership, innovation, and resilience intersected to produce meaningful results, appreciating the depth and subtlety of strategic thought required in prolonged engagements. Mafeking serves as a case study in how endurance, resourcefulness, and disciplined coordination can leave an imprint not only on immediate participants, but on institutional practice and cultural memory. By the conclusion of the siege, the town's defenders had demonstrated that sustained intelligence, adaptability, and human determination could overcome constraints that might have otherwise seemed insurmountable. The legacy of Mafeking is thus measured not solely in historical records, but in the enduring principles it exemplifies: strategic foresight, human resilience, and the quiet power of deliberate, sustained effort. When relief finally arrived, it did not feel like a sudden release from danger, but rather a slow unwinding of tension that had been held for too long. The siege ended not with celebration inside the town, but with silence, exhaustion, and careful reassessment. Men who had learned to live by routine now had to relearn uncertainty of a different kind. Decisions made under isolation were suddenly exposed to outside judgment, and every compromise, every calculated risk took on a new meaning. What had seemed necessary during the siege would now be measured against broader expectations and distant standards. News of Mafeking travelled far faster than relief columns ever could. In Britain, the siege became a symbol, shaped as much by imagination as by fact. Public reaction transformed endurance into legend, turning careful restraint into heroic defiance. This distance between lived experience and public perception mattered. The army, quietly and internally, paid closer attention to what the siege revealed about command, logistics, morale, and preparation. Mafeking was not remembered only for holding out, but for showing how modern war demanded patience, flexibility, and psychological control as much as firepower. For officers studying the siege, its lessons were subtle. The value of discipline without rigidity became clear. So did the importance of communication, even when limited, and the need to manage civilian populations alongside military objectives. Mafeking showed that morale could be sustained through structure rather than spectacle, and that leadership was often about reducing fear rather than inspiring boldness. These ideas would influence training, doctrine, and expectations in the years that followed, long after the dust had settled. For the soldiers and civilians who endured the siege, memory worked differently. Their experience was not defined by symbols or headlines, but by hunger, repetition, and quiet resolve. The end of the siege did not erase what had been learned at a personal level. Many carried forward a deeper understanding of limits, both physical and emotional. They had seen how small decisions accumulated, how restraint preserved strength, and how survival depended on cooperation more than courage. Mafeking's true legacy lies in this intersection between experience and interpretation. It reshaped Britain's army not through dramatic reform, but through gradual adjustment. The siege forced reflection on how wars are endured, not just how they are fought. It reminded planners and commanders that endurance could shape outcomes as decisively as movement or fire. In that sense, Mafeking did not belong only to its moment. It became a reference point, quietly influencing how future conflicts would be approached, understood, and endured.